Hey everybody, so I am just doing a bit of a chat today on what's next for Musket and Tomahawks, what my next minis are. I just finished my participation in the Spooky Oktoberfest, or Spooky Toberfest, I believe is the correct name, and now it's back on to other things. So next for Musket and Tomahawks for me is going to be the Warlord French Marines. And these are, I've just assembled them. They did require a fair bit of cleaning up, but I do like them. They're nice minis in general. Really, no two are supposed to be alike, and so you are painting. Although they're in similar uniforms and things, they're all in different kinds of poses, and there is like a lieutenant or an officer, I should say, with them. And other than that, they're all kind of in different poses and things. And I was going to talk a little bit about them today, but first I'm just going to, before I get into the French Marines themselves, what I want to do with them painting-wise and things like that. I just wanted to share just real quick story on getting these from Warlord. It started out, I got a big order from Warlord, and I got my Indians that I showed you guys, and everything was fine with them. I got some British regulars, everything was fine with them. I got some things for bolt action, everything fine. So it was a big order. But when I opened up this box, two things I noticed. One is that I got two of these guys. Okay, if you look at them here. Now, they look kind of like, they look kind of like frontiersmen, French Marines. They got the tricorn hat instead of like typical French Marine hat. Like, the officer there, obviously, I showed has the tricorn hat. But I didn't remember seeing these guys, and let alone two of them. But then as I was looking through the box, I noticed something else too. I noticed this. So focus in there. That's this guy's face. It looks like it'd been hit by grape shot, or something like that. And so, obviously, some issues, right? And I did have correct number of guys. I had 20 in the box. And so, I did actually call over to where I wrote Warlord. They promptly answered, and then really promptly addressed my concerns by sending me out a brand new box. And so in the end, this box does have one of these guys who, if you look at the package on the back, he's not part of this group. So if you go in there, he's nowhere to be found in there. And so for whatever reason, I don't know which guy is missing that's in there, but he's not in there. It's actually not a big deal for me because I do think he fits the period and looks just fine. But that was something I noticed. But I guess what I would say is, anytime I've ever had a problem with Warlord, and I've had a Mispick once, twice actually, but I've bought a lot of stuff from them, and so that's twice among many things. They're actually extremely good at getting stuff right out to you again, but the other thing, they do it at their cost. There's none of this send me bits back or we're just gonna find out which bit we need to give you to make part of the whole. They actually end up, if they mispicked a model, you keep the model and they send you the right model. I actually really appreciate that because of my waiting and then having to look at this, I've actually ended up getting a whole nother squad of or a whole nother troop of French Marine for this game. And yeah, like there's two guys like this in one of them, who cares. And actually for this guy, I've decided that I'm going to use the misfortunate situation as an opportunity. I'm going to file down his face and I'm going to try sculpting a face because I've been working on my sculpting, and so it's an opportunity out of a problem. And so thought I'd mention that. Like, one of the reasons I like dealing with Warlord is when mistakes do happen, you actually benefit. And I like that. Given that this is an expensive hobby, so don't really counting on mistakes to increase my army, but it's kind of nice when those things happen. So back to the Marines themselves. So I've read less about the Marines. They are, in my mind, kind of prototypical feature to the French Indian Wars. I believe they were involved in other conflicts within this, I'm not an expert, but I don't believe that they only existed for the French Indian War. What I have read is that they were an irregular troop, and typically and initially when they were formed, I had read that they were actually youth, like 16 years old. They were like volunteer youth, or they were not actual your regular enlisted men. And so the initial waves that came over from France, I believe, were young men, young Frenchmen, that actually were characterized by the ranks of the French Marines. Now, that changed as New France developed, and my understanding is that the future Canadians that actually ended up enlisting into the French Marine, and it was no longer just young men. I mean, those young men, aged a bit, but then also you had people enlisting to the French Marine that were older colonists in New France. And so if you look at this box, and it won't really help to look at the guys that are not painted yet, but if you look at this box, I suppose there are some that could pass for young men, but they're mostly, when I looked at it, they didn't look like young men. Like that guy there. Some of them probably could pass, So, you might argue that it's a bit of a mixed company, but there's definitely older looking guys in here. That's not a criticism, because that would be the case too. Like, there would be a bit of both. But it does reinforce a bit on how I want to paint these guys. So, before I talk about that, I'll just say that speaking of them as prototypical troops during the French Indian War, if you're a fan, I'll Ask the Mohicans, just a sort of a Daniel Day-Lewis movie. One of the scenes that I really liked in it, because it was just cool, was when Daniel Day-Lewis, I believe it was when they were coming up from a colonist house that was killed by Indians, that Daniel Day-Lewis and his the native companions that he was with, they knew this family, and so they were quite saddened by it. But he had his love interest, who was not yet his love interest at the time. They were in the middle of the woods at night. They hadn't found a place to stay. They were on their way to a fort. And in the middle of the night, they could hear, they were hiding out a bit, and they could hear people coming through the woods, and it ended up being a war party of Indians, but also you could clearly see right up front there French Marines intermixed with the Indians. And they were actually in a burial ground, and so the Indians and the French Marines kind of stepped forward. They put their hands up to the folks behind them to not go forward because it was a burial ground, and they kind of backed out. And it was just really cool because they were creeping through the woods at night, and it was like Indian, French Marine, Marine, Indian, like they were all mixed together. It kind of showed how they worked together. And one of the things you'll notice, it might take me a second to actually find one, but some of these guys, not only are they in frontier garb, but they're also, some of them have actual feathers on them, which that actually surprised me a bit. Not that was the case, that they were sort of dressing in the local garb and, of their allies, but that they had it on these models, like to reflect that. I think it's this one here. It's not most of them, but here's one just I grabbed as an example. This guy's got feathers on his back, like up there. So I think it supports that really close working together with the First Nation population that was there. There were skirmishers. You can use them in Musket and Tomahawks as regulars or skirmishers, but they were skirmishers, and they were, eventually quite closer tied to the land. I believe that that a big presence for the French Marines were to protect trade routes, like I think, I mean the fur trading, you know, and so that kind of makes sense. And so they're a really cool group to have, I think, in the game, represent that time. Despite that, one thing I did read in a number of places, and you know, in Crucible of War, the book I'm reading, it sort of was evidenced. Most of the major battles, despite these guys being prototypical, were fought by the regulars. So they may have had some units of French Marines in them, and I'd seen army lists for different battles, and they included French Marines. But the regulars, in the end, were, you know, first and forefront in the major population in the major battles. So, what I would like to do, there's more than one way to go about painting these guys, you know, obviously. But what I would like to do is, rather than paint them as they've done it here, where you're basically wearing the French blue and white, I've seen some other companies that make miniatures, it's escaping me, you know, which one it is, where they advertise for the same game, paint them a little differently, where they intermix regional garb they would have picked up when being out in the frontier and not in proximity to supply lines, or supplies weren't coming because of just how bad things were, you know, in the war. They wore and got whatever they could, and some of that is evidenced in the miniatures. You can actually see the frontier fringe on some of their coats. Now, the way they've painted them here, they've got frontier fringe, obviously, but they're wearing like almost like French uniforms, you know, the French colors. I'm going to take advantage of some of the sculpting where they actually have the frontier fringe and things, and give them those frontier jackets like they would have had. I would really like, personally, particularly since they're older, I think, this group, to paint all of them as more veteran, later war, have you. And there will be blue and white jackets and hats and things in there because they've retained them or happen to get one. Maybe the officer will have it. But I want to include the garb of that they would have picked up and would have gotten from their local regions. And so that's the way I'm going to choose to do it. So they're not going to really look like, you know, just one. I suppose they'll, just like my civilians, I mean, like they'll have some continuity among them because I'm not going to make all the colors on everybody different. But they are going to be a bit of a ragtag troop, you know, which just showing their being out in the field for such a long time. So that's the way I'm going to do these guys, and it would make sense from an efficiency perspective for me to just hit the next 20 as soon as I'm done with these. I never calculated for another 20 to do my demo, and to be honest, I'm going to reveal my weakness here as a painter or as a person, but I'm not really, I don't look forward to painting large numbers of minis, and I'm not sure that I'm the only one at that. It's never been, it's why I like lately these skirmish games, because I prefer to paint variety in smaller number. It's just the way I am. And even, I have not painted this many troops at once since I've painted my bolt action soldiers. The one good thing about these ones is that they're all different. Every single one here is different. Whereas the bolt action plastic kits, there was a lot more, monotony. You know, there were 5. So out of the 20 or whatever, you know, there were basically 5 variants, which weren't that much different. You know, in the bodies were pretty much all the same still, even though they're in different poses. I like the fact that these guys are all kind of like individuals, but I don't like the grind. It's not a part of it that I've ever liked. And so, yeah, I'll do these. It'll be fine. But I'm not going to actually do another 20 right afterwards. I am going to do another 20, but I'm going to go to my British force, do something different. And then, you know, after the demo, I'm going to see how things go, how my group of friends that I play games with, you know, like it, and whether or not anybody else kind of gets into it locally. And then I'll start painting the other ones up too. So yeah. That is the plan. If you like, you know, since I talked about these guys, I can just show a couple of them up close. They They did require a fair bit of cleanup. I do suspect that the molds are kind of old. I didn't get any hamburger face like on this group that they sent back, even though it was just one on that one, to be fair. I didn't get anything really bad. I really do like the character of them. Like, I actually think that the sculptures are nice and they're cool. I mean, like, they're like the Indians. I mean, like, they have some extras on a lot of them that really make them really cool. You know, like, you might see a rolled blanket or something like that here and there, which is kind of cool. And you even have some really cool poses. I mean, like, I've got one guy here that's just on the ground, you know, trying to get a shot. And so they also, most of them have tomahawks, which is great. I think I have more tomahawks on average on my Marines than I do on the Indians because of the high use of the gunstock clubs and the ball clubs and all the other stuff. A lot of these guys have tomahawks, which I think is cool. I believe that you can pay for points to give these guys tomahawks in the game. I could be wrong. Somebody could correct me on that. But it's been a little while since I read the rules, and I haven't played it yet. But I do believe there was something either for these guys or for scouts, like even like, you know, British scouts, where they could pay to get the tomahawk and use it. But there's like another tomahawk there. I'm going to use some of these guys' faces because they do. There is some continuity from the sculptor among their faces in the sense that they're all individuals. Some have mustaches. There are differences, but there is a similar look to all of them in the shape of the face, and I'm going to try to use that as a bit of a guide when I actually do some sculpting myself. I have sculpted when I was like many years ago, clay and stone when I was back in high school, many years ago, and I do remember that. You know, when using a guide, I mean, it's quite amazing what you can do when you just have something just to sort of look off of, as far as reproducing it. But yeah, I won't go through all of them today. You'll see more of these through the work in progress. I'm going to put some plaster on these guys' bases and then prime them and then go from there. So hope everybody's having a good week in the beginning of the week, and talk to you guys later. Take care.